Emily Davis, a bright-eyed 8-year-old brimming with a hopeful, infectious smile, cautiously stepped onto the imposing yellow school bus for the very first time in her unfamiliar new neighborhood. Her mother, Sarah, waved goodbye from the curb, her heart swelling with dreams of a brighter, better future for her relocated family. However, as the heavy bus doors hissed closed, sealing Emily inside, neither mother nor daughter could have possibly imagined the deeply sinister journey that lay ahead. Mr. Henderson, the seemingly avuncular, gray-haired bus driver with a practiced, grandfatherly demeanor, harbored something dark and disturbing behind his superficially friendly facade. His welcoming smile, offered so easily to other children, concealed a chillingly dark truth, a prejudice that would soon cast a long and terrifying shadow over young Emily's innocent life in ways her protective parents, Sarah and David, could never have anticipated. As the initial days blurred into weeks, Sarah's sharp maternal instinct began screaming, an internal alarm bell insisting that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. Settled into a predominantly white neighborhood, her burgeoning fears about Mr. Henderson, a long-standing bus driver apparently respected and trusted by the established community, seemed nearly impossible to voice aloud without risking immediate disbelief, dismissal, or worse, outright hostility. What unspeakable acts, what subtle cruelties were happening on that rolling yellow school bus? And how could one mother's unwavering determination to protect her beloved child become the unexpected catalyst for exposing a community's shocking, carefully hidden secrets? The warm summer breeze rustled playfully through the abundant leaves of the giant oak tree, standing sentinel in front of the modest, newly acquired two-story house. A large moving truck rumbled away down the quiet, tree-lined suburban street, leaving behind a hopeful family of 3 standing tentatively on their new front lawn. Emily, an energetic 8-year-old girl with a cascade of dark curly hair and sparkling, intelligent eyes, bounced excitedly on the balls of her feet, eagerly taking in the unfamiliar, yet promising surroundings. Her mother, Sarah, placed a gentle, reassuring hand on Emily's small shoulder. "Well, what do you think, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice tinged with a complex mixture of hopeful excitement and underlying apprehension about this significant move. Emily tilted her head, considering the question seriously. "It's different," she said finally, her young voice thoughtful. "But I really like the tree. Can we put a swing on it, Mom?" Sarah laughed, feeling some of the accumulated tension easing from her shoulders at her daughter's simple request. "We'll see, honey. Maybe once we're all settled in and unpacked." David, Emily's father, joined them on the lawn, wiping beads of sweat from his brow after the exertion of moving. "That's the last of the boxes," he announced with a sigh of relief. "What do you say we order some pizza and officially call a day?" As they walked together into their new, empty home, the Davis family couldn't help but notice the curious, lingering glances cast their way by their new neighbors. They were, after all, the only black family residing on this particular street, perhaps even in the entire neighborhood. Later that evening, gathered around a sturdy cardboard box, serving as a makeshift dinner table, David raised a slice of pepperoni pizza in a symbolic toast. "To new beginnings," he declared, his voice filled with genuine warmth and hopeful optimism for their future here. Sarah and Emily echoed the sentiment enthusiastically, their own pizza slices meeting his in the middle with a soft, satisfying clink of crust against crust. As they ate their first meal in their new house, they talked animatedly about their shared hopes and dreams for this new chapter in their lives. "I can't wait to finally set up my home office," Sarah said, her eyes sparkling with professional excitement. "No more long commuting for me. I'll be able to work on my graphic designs right here." David nodded, a proud and supportive smile spreading across his face. "And I'm sure you'll knock their socks off at the new firm," he said, referring to his own promising job opportunity in the bustling city nearby. "It's a bit of a drive each day, but the career opportunity is definitely worth it." Emily piped up then, her mouth momentarily full of gooey cheese and savory pepperoni. "What about my new school, Daddy? Do you think I'll make friends easily?" Sarah and David exchanged a quick, subtle glance, their confident smiles faltering just slightly at the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Of course you will, sweetie," Sarah assured her daughter quickly, reaching across the box to squeeze her hand. "You're smart, kind, and funny. The other kids will absolutely love you," David added encouragingly. "Just be yourself, Emily. That's all you ever need to do." As the evening wore on, the family continued to chat comfortably, their voices and laughter filling the otherwise empty house with much-needed warmth and life. They spoke eagerly of their aspirations for the future, the potential adventures they might embark on together, and the precious memories they hoped to create in this unfamiliar place. Yet, beneath the surface layer of excitement and anticipation, there resided an undeniable undercurrent of uncertainty. They were venturing into largely unknown territory, a predominantly white neighborhood that might not prove to be as welcoming or inclusive as they fervently hoped. Sarah and David had discussed this specific concern at length before making the significant decision to move, carefully weighing the abundant opportunities against the potential social and emotional challenges. "We're doing this for Emily," Sarah, David had stated firmly during one of their many late-night conversations preceding the move. "Better schools, safer streets. She deserves every possible chance we can give her." Sarah had agreed wholeheartedly at the time, but now, as she glanced around their new living room, still scattered haphazardly with unpacked boxes and filled with unfamiliar shadows cast by the setting sun, she couldn't help but feel a persistent twinge of deep-seated anxiety. Would they truly find acceptance here? Would Emily be able to truly thrive and feel like she belonged? As if sensing her mother's unspoken unease, Emily snuggled up close next to Sarah on the floor where they sat. "I'm glad we're here together, Mommy," she said simply, her small, trusting hand finding Sarah's. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, feeling a powerful surge of love and fierce protectiveness wash over her. "Me too, baby," she whispered softly, pulling Emily closer. "Me too." The family spent the remainder of the evening unpacking essential items and preparing themselves mentally and physically for the challenges of the next day. Tomorrow would bring significant milestones: David's crucial first day at his demanding new job, and even more importantly in Sarah's mind, Emily's very first day at her brand new school. As Sarah tucked Emily into bed that night, in a room still cluttered with boxes waiting to be unpacked, she paused for a moment to gently smooth her daughter's soft hair away from her face. "Are you excited about tomorrow, honey?" she asked softly. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "A little nervous, too," she admitted honestly. "That's perfectly okay," Sarah reassured her kindly. "It's completely normal to feel nervous about new things. But always remember, you are brave and you are strong. You've absolutely got this." Emily smiled then, her childish fears seeming to melt away under her mother's loving, confident gaze. "Thanks, Mom. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As Sarah gently closed Emily's door, she leaned against the cool wood for a moment, taking a long, deep breath. She hoped with every fiber of her being that tomorrow would indeed mark the start of something truly wonderful for all of them, but especially for her precious Emily. In their own bedroom, Sarah found David already settled in bed, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scrolled intently through his phone. "Checking the route to work again?" she asked gently, climbing in beside him. He nodded, putting the phone aside on the nightstand. "Want to make sure I don't get lost on my very first day," he said with a self-deprecating chuckle. Then, his tone turned more serious. "How's Emily doing?" "Nervous but excited," Sarah replied honestly. "I think she'll be okay, though." David wrapped a comforting arm around her, pulling her close against his side. "And how are you, really?" Sarah sighed, nestling into his familiar embrace. "The same, I guess. Nervous but excited." She paused for a moment, then added softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I really hope we made the right decision coming here, David." "We did," he said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "It might not be easy right at first, but we're together. We can handle absolutely anything, as long as we have each other." As they eventually drifted off to sleep, The house seemed to settle around them, creaking and sighing softly as if adjusting patiently to its new occupants. Outside, under the vast expanse of the night sky, countless stars twinkled brightly over their new neighborhood, holding within their distant light the silent promise of a fresh start, along with the unavoidable potential for both unforeseen challenges and unexpected triumphs in the days and weeks yet to come. The early morning sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the freshly paved driveway as Sarah and David stood anxiously with Emily, waiting for the arrival of the school bus. Emily clutched her brand-new, brightly colored backpack tightly in her small hands, her eyes darting nervously up and down the unfamiliar street. "You've got your lunch?" Sarah asked, instinctively smoothing Emily's hair for what felt like the 10th time that morning. Emily nodded confidently, patting her backpack reassuringly. "And my notebook and pencils." "And you're all set, champ," David interrupted gently, kneeling down to be at Emily's eye level. "Remember what we talked about?" Emily's face grew serious as she dutifully recited the instructions they had carefully rehearsed. "Be myself, be kind, and if anything makes me feel uncomfortable, tell a teacher or tell you guys right away." David smiled warmly, giving her a quick, encouraging hug. "That's my girl." Just then, the distant, familiar rumble of a heavy engine caught their attention as the large yellow school bus rounded the corner at the end of the street. Sarah felt her heart rate quicken involuntarily. This was it, the moment they had been both eagerly anticipating and quietly dreading. The bus pulled up to the curb with a hiss of its air brakes, its doors creaking open noisily. The driver, a middle-aged white man with neatly combed, graying hair, looked down at the small family group for a brief moment. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed his face before settling into a carefully neutral expression. "Good morning," he said, his tone polite but noticeably lacking genuine warmth. "You must be new to the route." Sarah nodded, forcing a bright smile she didn't quite feel. "Yes, we just moved in. This is Emily. She'll be riding with you." The driver nodded curtly. "Welcome aboard, Emily. I'm Mr. Henderson." Emily hesitated for a second, glancing back uncertainly at her parents. Sarah gave her an encouraging nod, while David whispered softly, "You've got this, sweetheart." Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Emily bravely climbed the steep steps onto the bus. As she disappeared inside, Sarah and David caught a fleeting glimpse of the other children already seated. Most seemed merely curious, a few offered tentative smiles, but one or two wore expressions that made Sarah's stomach clench with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Sarah and David stood silently, hand in hand, watching intently until the large vehicle disappeared around the corner. "She'll be fine," David said, giving Sarah's hand a reassuring squeeze. But there was a subtle hint of uncertainty lingering in his own voice that mirrored the worry clouding Sarah's heart. The day seemed to crawl by at an agonizingly slow pace for Sarah. She attempted to focus on the demanding task of setting up her home office, arranging furniture, and organizing supplies, but her thoughts kept drifting persistently back to Emily. Was she making new friends? Were her teachers kind and welcoming? Was she feeling terribly out of place as the new kid and the only black child in her class? When the time finally approached for Emily to return home, Sarah found herself pacing restlessly by the front window, anxiously watching the street. The familiar, welcome rumble of the bus engine finally sent her hurrying eagerly to the door. Emily bounded down the bus steps almost immediately, her backpack bouncing energetically against her back. Sarah's heart lifted instantly at the sight of her daughter's beaming smile. "Hi, Mom," Emily called out, waving enthusiastically as she ran up the driveway towards the house. "Hi, sweetie. How was your very first day?" Sarah asked, enveloping Emily in a warm, tight hug the moment she was within reach. Emily's excitement was palpable, almost contagious, as she recounted every detail of her day. Her nice teacher, Mrs. Gable, the friendly girl named Chloe she sat next to during lunch, the incredibly cool playground equipment she got to try during recess. Sarah listened intently, immense relief washing over her like a warm wave. It seemed thankfully, as though things had gone remarkably well. That evening, as the family sat together around the dinner table, finally using actual chairs instead of boxes, Emily continued to share animated stories from her successful first day. David, home from his own demanding first day at the new job, listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and laughing heartily at Emily's lively descriptions of her classroom and classmates. As a brief lull occurred in the conversation, Emily suddenly announced, quite unexpectedly, "Our bus driver is rude." Sarah and David exchanged surprised, concerned glances across the table. "What do you mean, honey?" Sarah asked carefully, keeping her tone light. Emily shrugged, suddenly looking distinctly uncomfortable, her earlier exuberance fading rapidly. "He just says mean things sometimes," she mumbled, avoiding their gaze, then quickly changed the subject, asking David a question about his new office. Sarah caught David's eye over Emily's head, seeing her own burgeoning concern clearly reflected in his expression. However, they decided not to push the issue further right then, not wanting to dampen Emily's otherwise positive and exciting first-day experience. Later that night, as Sarah and David were getting ready for bed, David brought up the subject again. "What do you think Emily meant about the bus driver, Sarah?" Sarah sighed, sitting down heavily on the edge of the bed. "I don't know, David. It could be nothing, really. Maybe he's just naturally gruff, you know? But," David prompted gently. "But it could be something," Sarah finished for him, voicing the worry that lingered in both their minds. "Should we ask her more about it tomorrow?" Sarah shook her head thoughtfully. "Not yet. Let's give it a few days, see if she mentions anything else. We don't want to make her anxious or self-conscious if it genuinely turns out to be nothing." David nodded in agreement, but Sarah could clearly see the worry lines creasing his forehead. She felt it too, that persistent, nagging sense deep down that something wasn't quite right. But for the time being, all they could really do was wait, watch, and hope for the best. As they settled into bed, Sarah found herself staring blankly up at the darkened ceiling, her mind replaying Emily's unsettling words over and over. "He just says mean things sometimes." What kind of mean things? And why would he say them to an 8-year-old child? The troubling questions swirled relentlessly in her mind, effectively keeping sleep at bay long into the quiet hours of the night. The weeks that followed seemed to settle into a predictable, somewhat comforting rhythm. David left early each morning for his long commute into the bustling city, while Sarah diligently worked from her newly established and efficient home office. Emily continued to ride the school bus to and from school each day, and life in their new house began to feel progressively more normal, more settled. Yet, beneath the placid surface of this emerging new routine, Sarah couldn't manage to shake a growing, persistent sense of deep unease. She noticed subtle, almost imperceptible changes in Emily's behavior. The bubbly, talkative girl who had excitedly recounted every minute detail of her first few days at the new school now typically gave only brief, non-committal, almost evasive answers when asked about her day. One particularly gray afternoon, as Sarah took a much-needed break from her demanding design work, she found Emily sitting quietly by the living room window, staring blankly outside with a distant, preoccupied look in her young eyes. "Emily," Sarah called softly, approaching her daughter gently. "Is everything okay, honey?" Emily startled slightly, as if abruptly pulled from deep, troubling thoughts. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her expressive eyes. Sarah sat down carefully beside her daughter on the window seat, gently stroking her soft, curly hair. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Anything at all. If something's bothering you at school, or maybe with friends, or—" She trailed off purposefully, hoping Emily would fill in the blank, open up about whatever was troubling her. But Emily just nodded mutely, leaning into her mother's comforting touch without uttering a single word. That evening, while David worked late at the office again, Sarah decided to gently broach the subject once more. She sat down next to Emily on the comfortable living room couch, casually asking about her school day. When Emily offered her usual short, vague answers, Sarah gently brought up the bus driver comment from several weeks prior. Remember when you mentioned that the bus driver, Mr. Henderson, sometimes says mean things? Sarah asked, consciously keeping her tone light and non-accusatory. Has anything like that happened again, recently? Emily tensed visibly, her small hands immediately beginning to fidget nervously with the hem of her colorful shirt. It's nothing, Mommy, she insisted, but her voice quivered slightly, betraying her attempt at nonchalance. Sarah noticed Emily's eyes darting nervously around the room, almost as if she was afraid someone else might overhear their private conversation. The sight made Sarah's heart ache with a mixture of worry and helplessness. What could possibly have her daughter so afraid? Emily, sweetheart, Sarah said tenderly, gently cupping Emily's face between her hands. You know you can tell me absolutely anything, right? If someone is being mean to you, or if you're scared about something, I need to know. I'm here to help you, always. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though Emily might finally open up. Her lower lip trembled precariously, and tears welled up, glistening in her large, dark eyes. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the moment of vulnerability vanished. Emily pulled away abruptly, forcing another bright, artificial smile. I'm fine, Mom, really. Can I go play in my room now? Sarah nodded slowly, her heart feeling heavy as lead as she watched Emily hurry away down the hallway. Something was definitely, undeniably wrong, but she felt utterly helpless, unable to figure out what it was or how to help her daughter. When David finally arrived home late that night, Sarah shared her troubling observations as they prepared a simple dinner together in the kitchen. She recounted Emily's increasingly strange, withdrawn behavior, her own powerful gut feeling that something was seriously amiss, and her completely failed attempt earlier that evening to get Emily to open up and confide in her. David listened patiently as he stirred the simmering pasta sauce, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. When Sarah finished speaking, he sighed heavily, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. Sarah, honey, I think you might be overreacting a bit, he said, his voice laced with fatigue from his long day. Emily is probably just adjusting still. It's a huge change for all of us, remember? Sarah felt a sudden flare of sharp frustration rise within her. But David, you haven't seen how she's been acting lately. I really, truly think. David cut her off abruptly, his own voice rising slightly with stress. I have enough problems piling up at work right now, Sarah. I really don't need you bringing this up again and again. Just let it go for now. Emily's fine. Please don't make this into something bigger than it is. The kitchen fell into a tense, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft bubbling of the sauce on the stove. Sarah turned away, feeling deeply hurt, angry, and completely unsupported, her carefully voiced concerns invalidated in an instant. David immediately regretted his sharp outburst, but felt awkward and unsure how to retract his words. They finished preparing the rest of the dinner in a strained, intense silence. When Emily joined them at the dining table a few minutes later, the atmosphere was palpably strained. Emily looked uncertainly from one parent to the other, clearly sensing the unspoken tension lingering heavily in the air. Is everything okay? She asked hesitantly, her young voice small. Everything's fine, sweetheart, David replied quickly, forcing a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. How was your day? As Emily launched into a carefully edited, overly cheerful version of her day, Sarah listlessly pushed her food around her plate, her appetite completely gone. She caught David's apologetic glance from across the table, but couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes directly. That night, as they lay stiffly in bed, their backs turned towards each other, Sarah found sleep impossible. She replayed Emily's words, her withdrawn behavior, and her fearful glances over and over in her mind. Her powerful maternal instinct continued, screaming relentlessly that something was very, very wrong. But David's dismissive reaction to her concerns left her feeling utterly isolated and profoundly unsure. What if she was overreacting? What if Emily was just going through a perfectly normal, albeit difficult, adjustment period? But then, why did she continue to have this persistent, chilling feeling of dread lodged deep in the pit of her stomach? Sarah tossed and turned restlessly, her mind racing uncontrollably. She thought about the bus driver, Mr. Henderson. She thought about Emily's noticeable behavioral changes, about the troubling way their usually vibrant daughter seemed to withdraw more and more into herself with each passing day. There simply had to be a connection, but what could it possibly be? As the very first faint light of dawn began to timidly creep through the bedroom curtains, Sarah made a silent, firm decision. If no one else, not even David, would take her deeply felt concerns seriously, then she would simply have to find out the truth for herself. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would take matters decisively into her own hands. Bolstered by this newfound resolution, Sarah finally drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep, completely unaware of the dramatic and life-altering events that were destined to unfold in the coming days. Events that would shake their family to its very core and irrevocably change their lives forever. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the gloomy weather perfectly matching Sarah's determined, yet apprehensive mood as she went through the familiar motions of getting Emily ready for school. David had already left early for work, the palpable tension from the previous night's sharp argument still hanging heavily and unspoken in the air between them. As Emily climbed dutifully onto the waiting school bus, Sarah waved goodbye with a complex mixture of profound worry and steely determination. Today, she vowed silently, would be different. Today, somehow, she would find out what was truly going on. The very moment the large yellow bus pulled away from the curb and turned the corner, Sarah sprang into decisive action. She quickly grabbed her car keys and a light jacket, her heart pounding in her chest with a potent mix of nervous anxiety and unwavering determination. Locking the front door securely behind her, Sarah slid into the driver's seat of her car, her hands shaking slightly as she turned the key in the ignition. As she carefully pulled out of the driveway, she caught sight of a neighbor casually watering her pristine lawn across the street. The woman waved cheerfully, and Sarah forced a polite smile in return, desperately hoping her unusual actions wouldn't arouse any undue suspicion. She maintained a safe, discreet distance as she followed the unmistakable yellow school bus through the winding, unfamiliar suburban streets. Her heart raced erratically, and she felt equal parts resolute and utterly ridiculous. What if David was right after all, and she was just being an overprotective, overreacting mother? But then the chilling counter-thought immediately surfaced. What if he was wrong, and Emily was genuinely in some kind of trouble or danger? The bus made its usual, predictable stops, methodically picking up children along the designated route. Sarah noticed something that struck her as distinctly odd. At each stop, Emily seemed to be the very last child allowed to board, even when other children were already waiting patiently at the same designated bus stop. Was this merely a strange coincidence, or was there something more calculated, more sinister behind it? At one particular stop, Sarah thought she saw Mr. Henderson, the bus driver, lean down and say something pointedly to Emily as she cautiously climbed the steep steps. Emily's small shoulders seemed to hunch slightly in response, but from her current distance, Sarah couldn't be entirely certain if she was just imagining things fueled by her own anxiety. When they finally reached the sprawling elementary school, Sarah parked her car across the street, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as she intently watched the children disembark. Mr. Henderson, his distinctive graying hair clearly visible even from this distance, helped the younger kids off the bus with what appeared to be a patient, practiced smile. When it was Emily's turn to get off, he even gave her a seemingly friendly pat on the shoulder. Sarah felt a confusing, jarring mix of immense relief and profound bewilderment wash over her. From everything she could objectively see from her vantage point, Mr. Henderson seemed perfectly kind, professional, and appropriate. His interaction with Emily appeared entirely normal, even warm and friendly. So why, then, did Emily insist he was rude? Why did she seem so intensely uncomfortable and fearful when talking about him? As she drove slowly back home, Sarah tried desperately to reconcile what she had just witnessed with her persistent, nagging gut feeling. Maybe she was overreacting after all. Maybe Emily was simply having a difficult time adjusting to the new school, the new neighborhood, and all the associated changes. But a nagging, persistent doubt remained stubbornly lodged in her mind. What if Mr. Henderson had somehow noticed her following the bus and had deliberately changed his behavior accordingly, putting on a convincing performance for any potential onlookers? Back safely within the walls of her own home, Sarah attempted to focus on her demanding graphic design work, but her mind kept drifting inexorably back to what she had observed, or perhaps failed to observe, earlier that morning. She couldn't shake the persistent, unsettling feeling that she was missing something crucial, some vital piece of the puzzle. The disparate pieces were all there, scattered before her, but she simply couldn't quite make them fit together into a coherent, understandable picture. As the long day wore on, Sarah's troubled thoughts continued to churn relentlessly. Should she confide in David about her clandestine surveillance mission? Would he understand her deep-seated concerns this time? Or would he simply be angry that she had gone behind his back, acting on what he considered unfounded suspicions? And what about Emily herself? Should she confront her daughter directly, demanding to know what was really going on during those daily bus rides? By the time Emily returned home from school that afternoon, Sarah had made up her mind. She wouldn't mention her impromptu and ultimately inconclusive stakeout to anyone. Not yet, anyway. She needed more concrete information, more tangible proof, before she could take any further action. "How was school today, sweetie?" Sarah asked as casually as possible as Emily walked listlessly through the front door. Emily shrugged, offering her now usual, disappointingly brief response. "Fine," she mumbled, heading directly towards the sanctuary of her room without making eye contact. Sarah watched her go, her heart aching with a heavy mixture of love and frustration. Something was definitely terribly wrong. She felt it in her bones. But what was it? And how could she possibly help her daughter if Emily steadfastly refused to open up to her? That night, as the family sat down together for dinner, Sarah observed Emily closely, trying to appear nonchalant. She noticed how her daughter listlessly pushed her food around her plate, barely eating a bite. She noted how Emily consistently avoided making direct eye contact with either her or David. She saw how Emily seemed to physically shrink into herself whenever David asked even simple, innocuous questions about her school day. After dinner, as David began clearing the table, Sarah approached Emily gently. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "Want to watch a movie together tonight? Just us girls." Emily hesitated for a moment, seeming to weigh the offer, then nodded slowly. As they settled comfortably together on the plush living room couch, Sarah pulled her daughter close, wrapping a protective arm around her small shoulders. For a long while, they sat together in companionable silence, the flickering glow of the television screen washing over their faces in the dimly lit room. "You know I love you very, very much, right?" Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely above a heartfelt whisper. Emily looked up at her, surprise evident in her wide eyes. "I know, Mom. I love you too." Sarah hugged her daughter even tighter. "And you know you can tell me anything, Emily? Absolutely anything at all. Nothing you say could ever make me stop loving you." For a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of something. Fear? Sadness? Desperation? Deep within Emily's eyes. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by another carefully constructed, forced smile. "I know, Mom," Emily said softly, turning her attention pointedly back to the movie playing on the screen. Sarah sighed inwardly, a wave of disappointment washing over her. She hadn't managed to break through her daughter's protective wall. Not yet. But she absolutely wouldn't give up. Something was seriously wrong, and she was utterly determined to find out exactly what it was. She would protect her daughter, no matter the cost, no matter what obstacles stood in her way. As Emily eventually drifted off to sleep later that evening, nestled safely in her mother's arms on the couch, Sarah made a silent, solemn promise to herself and to her sleeping child. She would get to the bottom of this mystery, with or without David's understanding or support. She would uncover the truth about what was really going on with Mr. Henderson and those deeply troubling bus rides. and she would ensure her precious daughter was safe, protected, and cherished, no matter what it took. Little did Sarah know at that moment that the truth she so desperately sought would soon come crashing down upon their unsuspecting family, sooner and far more dramatically than she could have ever possibly anticipated. The events of the coming days would test their family's resilience in ways they never thought possible and force them to confront harsh, uncomfortable realities about their new life in this outwardly idyllic, yet deeply flawed, neighborhood. The following afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting absently on a park bench at the local playground, distractedly watching Emily play listlessly on the swings. Her mind was still whirling relentlessly with unanswered questions and mounting concerns stemming from the previous day's fruitless observations. As she sat there, lost deep in troubled thought, a friendly voice suddenly startled her back to reality. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Sarah looked up, slightly disoriented, to see one of her neighbors, a middle-aged white woman she vaguely recognized from a few houses down the street. The woman smiled warmly, gesturing towards the empty space on the park bench beside Sarah. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Sarah nodded, forcing a polite smile in return. "Of course not, please sit down." As the woman settled comfortably beside her, Sarah's mind began racing. Here was an unexpected opportunity, a chance perhaps to gain another perspective, to gauge whether her profound concerns were genuinely justified, or if she was indeed, as David had suggested, simply overreacting due to the stress of the move. "I'm Karen, by the way," the woman said conversationally, extending her hand pleasantly. "I think we're just a few houses down from you." "Sarah," she replied, shaking Karen's offered hand briefly. "Nice to meet you properly." They chatted amiably for a few minutes, discussing innocuous topics like the neighborhood, the pleasant weather, and the universal challenges of moving to a new place. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, grateful for the seemingly friendly and normal conversation. Finally, gathering her courage, Sarah decided to cautiously broach the sensitive subject that had been consuming her thoughts for weeks. "Karen," she began hesitantly, choosing her words with deliberate care. "Can I ask you something? It's about the school bus driver, Mr. Henderson." Karen's eyebrows raised slightly in mild surprise, but she nodded encouragingly. "Of course. What about him?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to sound calm and reasonable. "Emily, my daughter, well, she mentioned the bus driver being a bit rude sometimes. I've just been a little concerned lately about how he treats the kids, especially the younger ones. I was just wondering if perhaps you've heard anything similar from other parents in the neighborhood, or maybe from your own children." The change in Karen's demeanor was both immediate and profoundly shocking. Her previously friendly smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hard, angry expression that made Sarah physically recoil slightly. "How dare you?" Karen hissed, her voice suddenly low but filled with palpable venom. "How dare you accuse Mr. Henderson of anything inappropriate? He's been driving the kids in this neighborhood safely for decades. He's a good man, a pillar of this community." Sarah was stunned into silence, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly as Karen continued her furious tirade. "You people just move into this neighborhood, and you're already starting trouble, thinking you know better than everyone else." Karen spat, her face flushing an ugly shade of red with anger. "If you don't like how things are done around here, you're perfectly free to leave. In fact, I think you'd be doing everyone here a huge favor if you did." The vicious words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The thinly veiled, ugly racism simmering beneath the surface of Karen's hostile outburst left her feeling physically sick to her stomach. She had suspected, perhaps even expected, that not everyone in the neighborhood would be immediately welcoming, but the raw, unadulterated hostility radiating from Karen's voice was beyond anything she could have possibly imagined. I'm sorry," Sarah managed to stammer, rising unsteadily from the bench on shaky legs. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. I was just concerned about my daughter." Karen stood up as well, her eyes cold and unforgiving. "Well, maybe you should teach your daughter to show some proper respect instead of making up nasty stories about good, decent people." With that parting shot, Karen turned sharply on her heel and stalked away angrily, leaving Sarah standing alone, feeling as though the very ground had been violently pulled out from under her feet. Across the playground, Emily had stopped swinging and was watching the disturbing scene unfold with wide, worried eyes. Sarah forced herself to conjure a weak, reassuring smile for her daughter, even as her own mind reeled uncontrollably from the brutal, unexpected encounter. As they walked home together hand in hand a few minutes later, Sarah's thoughts were in absolute turmoil. Karen's reaction had been so incredibly extreme, so utterly disproportionate to a simple, cautiously worded question. Was this hostile attitude representative of how the entire neighborhood truly felt about them? Were they instantly perceived as troublemakers, as unwelcome outsiders, simply for existing here while black? More importantly, and far more terrifyingly, what did this vitriolic reaction potentially mean for Emily's precarious situation? If this was how a supposedly friendly adult reacted to a mere, gentle question about Mr. Henderson, how would the community respond if Emily ever summoned the courage to come forward with a real, substantiated complaint about his behavior? That night, long after Emily had finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat alone in the darkened living room, turning the day's upsetting events over and over in her troubled mind. She hadn't yet told David about her deeply unsettling conversation with Karen at the park. She simply couldn't bear to see the potential "I told you so" look in his eyes if he once again dismissed her valid concerns as mere overreaction. But now, more than ever before, Sarah was utterly convinced that something was profoundly, dangerously wrong. The puzzle pieces still didn't quite fit together coherently, but Karen's vitriolic overreaction had only served to strengthen Sarah's unwavering resolve to get to the absolute bottom of whatever was happening to her daughter. As she finally headed towards bed, exhaustion weighing heavily upon her shoulders, Sarah made another firm, resolute decision. She would continue her investigation discreetly on her own. She would watch carefully, listen intently, and meticulously gather any scrap of evidence she could find. And when she finally had enough tangible proof to demonstrate that her deep concerns were undeniably valid, she would confront David, the school administration, and anyone else who dared to stand in the way of protecting her child. Little did Sarah know that the horrifying truth she sought was poised to come crashing down upon their family much sooner, and far more dramatically, than she could have ever anticipated. The disturbing events inadvertently set in motion by her simple, concerned question to Karen would rapidly snowball into a full-blown crisis, one that would severely test their family's strength, challenge their fundamental beliefs, and forever alter the course of their lives within this new and increasingly unwelcoming community. The subsequent weeks following Sarah's deeply unsettling encounter with Karen at the park were filled with a tense, uneasy quiet that settled over the Davis household like a heavy shroud. Sarah and David found themselves hypervigilant, constantly watching Emily for any subtle signs of distress or unusual behavior. However, somewhat confusingly, she actually seemed to be doing better. The dark cloud of anxiety that had seemingly hung over her in recent weeks appeared to be gradually lifting, and she was noticeably talking more about school activities and her newly acquired friends. Sarah found herself tentatively wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, her deeply ingrained fears had been unfounded after all. Maybe Emily had just been going through a particularly difficult adjustment period, and things were finally, blessedly, settling down into a more normal rhythm. The thought brought both a wave of profound relief and a sharp, accompanying twinge of guilt. Had she really been on the very verge of potentially upending their entire lives, disrupting their fragile new beginning, based on what might have been nothing more than maternal anxiety? On a crisp, beautiful autumn afternoon, Sarah sat intently at her desk, deeply engrossed in a complex design project for a demanding new client. The house was peacefully quiet, filled only with the soft, rhythmic tapping of her keyboard and the occasional gentle rustle of colorful fall leaves drifting past the window outside. Glancing casually at the clock displayed on her computer screen, Sarah realized with a start that it was almost time for Emily to return home from school. She carefully saved her work and headed downstairs to the kitchen to prepare an after-school snack, a comforting part of their established daily routine. As she methodically sliced fresh apples and generously spread creamy peanut butter on whole wheat crackers, Sarah found herself humming softly under her breath. For the first time in what felt like many long weeks, she experienced a fleeting, precious sense of normalcy, a comforting feeling that things might finally be falling properly into place in their new home and community. For a clock arrived, and then slowly passed. Sarah wasn't overly worried just yet. Sometimes the school bus ran a few minutes late due to traffic or unforeseen delays. She arranged the prepared snack appealingly on a colorful plate and set it expectantly on the kitchen counter, then briefly returned to her office upstairs to answer a quick, urgent email. But as the clock relentlessly ticked past 4:15 with still no sign of Emily, a tight knot of familiar anxiety began to form deep in Sarah's stomach. She hurried to the front window, anxiously peering out at the quiet, empty street. No large yellow bus was in sight. By 4:30, Sarah was pacing restlessly back and forth across the living room floor, her cell phone clutched tightly in her hand. She called David at his office, trying desperately to keep the rising panic out of her voice as she explained that Emily hadn't yet come home from school. "I'm sure it's probably nothing," she said quickly, as much to convince herself as to reassure David. "Maybe the bus broke down or got stuck in traffic or something. But David, I'm really starting to get worried now." David's voice on the other end of the line was tense, but commendably reassuring. "Okay, Sarah, stay calm. I'm leaving work right now. I'll be home as absolutely soon as I can. Have you called the school yet?" Sarah shook her head, then remembered belatedly that David couldn't see her gesture. "No, not yet. I wanted to check with you first. I'll call them right now." As the afternoon sun began its descent towards the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the front lawn, Sarah's initial worry rapidly escalated into full-blown, heart-pounding panic. She called the school, her voice trembling uncontrollably as she explained that her daughter, Emily Davis, hadn't arrived home on the bus as scheduled. The school receptionist, after a brief pause, informed her coolly that all school buses had already returned to the depot for the day, and the school office was now closing. "But my daughter isn't home," Sarah insisted, her voice rising sharply with fear and frustration. "She has to be somewhere between the school and here. Can't you check the bus logs? Can't you do something?" The receptionist's voice remained sympathetic, but firm and unhelpful. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Davis, but all our administrative staff have already left for the day. If your daughter doesn't turn up very soon, I strongly suggest you contact the police." Sarah hung up the phone, her hand shaking violently. Call the police? How could this possibly have happened? How could a perfectly normal, ordinary school day have inexplicably transformed into this terrifying, unfolding nightmare? David arrived home shortly thereafter to find Sarah dissolved in tears, frantically dialing the number for the bus depot, her desperation palpable. Sarah and David clung tightly to each other in the entryway, both instantly imagining horrific worst-case scenarios, the loud ticking of the grandfather clock on the mantelpiece seeming to mock their anguish with each passing, agonizing second. "This is all my fault," Sarah whispered brokenly, her voice hoarse from crying. "I knew something was wrong all along. I should have done more. I should have pushed harder. I should have." David cut her off gently, pulling her into a tight, protective embrace. "This is absolutely not your fault, Sarah. Don't even think that for a second. We'll find her. She has to be somewhere nearby." Just as Sarah, unable to bear the passive waiting any longer, was about to grab her car keys and start driving frantically around the neighborhood searching, they heard the distinct, unmistakable creak of the front door opening. Time seemed to stand utterly still as they both turned sharply towards the sound, their hearts pounding in unison. There stood Emily, walking slowly into the house, a full 2 hours late. Her normally bright yellow skirt was wrinkled and smudged, her favorite pink shirt was askew, and her usually neat braids were noticeably disheveled. Sarah rushed towards her daughter instantly, wrapping her in a fierce, tight embrace. "Oh, Emily, where have you been? We were so incredibly worried," she cried, overwhelming relief and lingering fear mingling chaotically in her voice. David joined them immediately, enveloping both Sarah and Emily in his strong arms. For a long moment, they simply stood there, a tangled embrace of limbs and raw emotions, the paralyzing fear of the past agonizing hours finally giving way to an almost unbearable wave of profound relief. But as Sarah gently pulled back to look closely at her daughter's face, she felt her blood run suddenly cold. Emily was deathly pale, her wide eyes filled with unshed tears and a haunting look Sarah had never seen before. She was trembling slightly, almost imperceptibly, and there was something deeply disturbing in her expression, a complex, chilling mix of profound fear, shame, and something else entirely, something Sarah couldn't quite identify, that made her mother's heart clench painfully in her chest. "Emily, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, tenderly cupping her daughter's small, pale face in her hands. "What happened? Where were you?" Emily looked up slowly at her anxious parents, her lower lip quivering uncontrollably. Then, in a voice barely louder than a choked whisper, she uttered the 6 devastating words that would instantly shatter their recently rearranged world. "The bus driver. He did it again." The room fell instantly silent, the immense weight of Emily's whispered words hanging heavy and ominous in the suddenly still air. Sarah and David exchanged a horrified, disbelieving glance, the full, sickening implications of what their precious daughter had just revealed slowly, terrifyingly sinking in. In that single, heart-stopping moment, all of Sarah's deeply held fears, all her nagging suspicions, and all the persistent worries of the past several weeks came crashing down upon her with the force of a physical blow. She had been right all along. Something was terribly, dreadfully wrong. And now, looking intently at her daughter's small, haunted expression, she realized with chilling certainty that the horrifying truth was likely far, far worse than anything she could have possibly imagined in her darkest moments. Sarah and David exchanged another horrified, silent glance before gently guiding a trembling Emily over to the relative comfort of the living room couch. They sat down immediately on either side of her, instinctively creating a protective, loving cocoon around her small frame. David gently took one of Emily's cold hands in his own large, warm one, while Sarah began stroking her back soothingly, trying to project a calm she absolutely did not feel. "Sweetheart," Sarah began, her voice soft but firm, laced with an undercurrent of urgency, "we need you to tell us everything. Please, what exactly do you mean? The bus driver did it again? What has Mr. Henderson been doing to you?" Emily hesitated, her small body shaking visibly. She looked uncertainly from Sarah's concerned face to David's grim expression, then down at her own tightly clasped hands resting in her lap. After a long moment of tense, suffocating silence, she finally began to speak, her voice quavering initially, but growing steadier as she continued. "Mr. Henderson, he doesn't like me," Emily stated baldly, fresh tears welling up and spilling silently from her wide, frightened eyes. "He doesn't like our kind." Sarah and David exchanged another pained, heartbroken look over Emily's head, their absolute worst fears now horrifyingly confirmed. David squeezed Emily's hand encouragingly, silently urging her to continue, to tell them the whole story, no matter how difficult. Emily took a deep, shuddering breath and began to reveal the full, disturbing extent of the torment she had been silently enduring since her very first week at the new school. Mr. Henderson, she explained, had been making consistent, insidious, passive-aggressive, and overtly racist remarks towards her. He would mutter derogatory things under his breath just loud enough for her to hear as she boarded the bus each morning, or make pointed, cruel comments about certain people not belonging in their nice, quiet neighborhood. "When I told you before that he was rude," Emily continued, her voice surprisingly gaining strength as she finally unburdened herself, "I was just so scared. I didn't know how to explain it properly. I thought maybe I was just imagining things, or being too sensitive. Sarah felt a fresh wave of crushing guilt wash over her. She had sensed something was terribly wrong, but she hadn't pushed hard enough, hadn't trusted her own instincts fully. She hadn't adequately protected her own child. But then, Emily dropped the bombshell revelation that sent icy chills racing down both her parents' spines. This horrifying incident wasn't the first time Mr. Henderson had deliberately left her stranded miles from home. He had done it once before, about a month ago, callously dropping her off on a deserted, unfamiliar road far from their neighborhood. He told me, Emily recounted, her voice dropping back to a barely audible whisper, if I ever told anyone, I would deeply regret it. He said no one would believe me anyway, because of the color of my skin. Sarah pulled Emily into another fierce, tight embrace, her own hot tears falling freely now, mingling with her daughter's. David stood up abruptly, pacing agitatedly back and forth across the living room, his fists clenched tightly at his sides in barely suppressed rage. Today, Emily continued, her words muffled slightly against Sarah's shoulder. He did again. He just stopped the bus suddenly, opened the door, and told me to get out. I was so scared, Mommy. I didn't know where I was, or how I would ever get home. As Emily's harrowing story continued to unfold, Sarah and David were overwhelmed by a tumultuous storm of conflicting emotions, absolute horror at the cruelty their innocent daughter had suffered, profound guilt for not realizing the full extent of the situation sooner, and a fierce, burning, protective anger towards Mr. Henderson, and towards a complacent system that could possibly allow such blatant abuse and discrimination to occur unchecked. I walked for such a long time, Emily said, her voice small and utterly exhausted now. I was too afraid to ask anyone for help, because Mr. Henderson said if I told anyone, he'd make absolutely sure we had to leave town, that everyone in the whole neighborhood would know we didn't belong here. David immediately knelt down on the floor, directly in front of Emily, gently taking both her small hands in his. Emily, listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice thick and choked with emotion. What Mr. Henderson did to you was wrong. It was very, very wrong, and it is absolutely, positively not your fault. Do you understand me? None of this is your fault. Emily nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down her pale cheeks. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner, she whispered guiltily. Oh, baby, Sarah said, hugging her daughter even tighter. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for. We are so incredibly proud of you for being so brave and telling us now. As Emily's heartbreaking story finally came to an end, she seemed to deflate completely, utterly exhausted both physically and emotionally from her ordeal and the difficult recounting of it. Sarah and David shared a long, determined look over their daughter's bowed head. They both knew, without needing to speak a word, exactly what they had to do next. Emily, David said gently but firmly, we need to call the police right now. What Mr. Henderson did isn't just wrong, it's against the law. We have to make absolutely sure he can never do this to you, or to any other child, ever again. Emily's eyes widened instantly in fresh fear. But what if they don't believe me? What if Mr. Henderson was right, and they just think I'm lying because... Sarah tenderly cupped Emily's face in her hands again, looking directly and intently into her daughter's frightened eyes. We believe you, sweetheart, 100%, and we will make them believe you too. We will not let anyone hurt you or scare you ever again. I promise you that. As David reached for the phone on the end table to dial 911, Sarah held Emily close, her own mind racing with a whirlwind of anxious thoughts. She thought immediately about Karen's hostile, defensive reaction in the park. She thought about the suspicious, unwelcoming glances they had received from some neighbors since the day they moved in. Would the police take their report seriously? Would they face yet more insidious racism and blatant disbelief from the very authorities meant to protect them? But then, looking down at Emily's tear-stained, innocent face, Sarah knew with unwavering certainty that they had absolutely no other choice. They had to fight back, not just for Emily, but for every single child who might face similar discrimination, abuse, or neglect. They had to stand up tall, make their voices heard loud and clear, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable the path ahead might be. As the distant, approaching sound of police sirens grew steadily closer, Sarah mentally steeled herself for the inevitable battle that lay ahead. It would undoubtedly be difficult, she knew. They would likely face skepticism, hostility, and probably even more overt racism. But they would face it all together, united as a family. And they would not rest, not for a single moment, until justice was fully served and Emily, and every child like her, was finally truly safe. The shrill, piercing ring of the doorbell cut sharply through the tense, heavy atmosphere that had settled over the Davis household. David, his jaw set with grim determination, strode purposefully to the front door and opened it to reveal two uniformed police officers standing on their porch. A tall, stern-looking, middle-aged white man and a younger, calmer-looking black woman. "Good evening, sir," the male officer said, his voice professional but not entirely unkind. "I'm Officer Thompson, and this is my partner, Officer Brooks. We received a call about a potentially missing child." David nodded curtly, ushering them inside. "Yes, that was us. But our daughter is home now, thankfully. However, we have a very serious situation we need to report." As the officers entered the living room, Sarah stood up protectively, still holding Emily close beside her. The female officer, Officer Brooks, immediately knelt down to Emily's eye level, offering a gentle smile. "Hi there," she said softly. "You must be Emily. I'm very glad to see you're safe. Is it okay if we ask you and your parents some questions about what happened today?" Emily nodded hesitantly, clinging tightly to Sarah's hand for reassurance. Over the course of the next hour, the distraught family recounted the day's terrifying events, as well as detailing the ongoing pattern of disturbing issues with Mr. Henderson. Officer Thompson took meticulous notes, his facial expression remaining largely unreadable, while Officer Brooks gently encouraged Emily to share as much detail as she felt comfortable revealing. As Emily finished her harrowing story, a heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Officer Thompson cleared his throat audibly. "That's quite a serious accusation, Mrs. Davis," he said, his tone careful, almost skeptical. "Mr. Henderson has been a respected member of this community for many decades." Sarah felt a sudden surge of hot anger rise within her. "Are you saying you don't believe our daughter?" she demanded sharply, her voice trembling slightly with indignation. Officer Brooks quickly interjected, attempting to smooth things over. "What my partner means, ma'am, is that we need to investigate this matter thoroughly. This is a very serious allegation involving potential charges, and we need to handle it carefully and by the book." David, who had remained mostly silent throughout the interview, finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. "We understand that, officers, but our daughter has been deeply traumatized by this experience. We need to know, unequivocally, that you are taking this situation as seriously as it deserves." Officer Thompson nodded, though his expression still betrayed a degree of skepticism. "We'll definitely need to speak with Mr. Henderson, of course, and we'll need to try and corroborate Emily's story somehow. Are there any other children on the bus route who might have witnessed anything unusual?" Emily shook her head sadly, fresh tears welling up in her eyes again. "Mr. Henderson always made sure I was the last one left on the bus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah's heart clenched painfully at her daughter's devastating words. How long had this insidious manipulation been going on? How could they possibly have failed to notice sooner? As the officers prepared to leave, Sarah made a sudden, resolute decision. "We want to go with you," she stated firmly, her voice unwavering. "When you go talk to Mr. Henderson, we want to be there." Officer Thompson looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, that's not really standard protocol." "I don't care about protocol," Sarah interrupted forcefully. "This is our daughter we're talking about. We need to see this through right now." After a brief moment of hesitation, Officer Brooks nodded decisively. "All right, you can come with us, but you'll need to stay in the patrol car while we speak with Mr. Henderson initially." As they drove silently through the quiet, dark suburban streets, Sarah's mind raced frantically. She knew exactly where the bus driver lived, just 2 streets away from their own house. The geographical proximity that had once seemed merely convenient now felt deeply threatening, almost suffocating. They pulled up slowly in front of a modest, well-kept 2-story house, its front lawn neatly manicured, even in the darkness. Sarah felt a fresh surge of bitter anger rise within her at the sheer, infuriating normalcy of it all. How could someone capable of causing her innocent daughter so much profound pain and terror live in such an utterly ordinary, unremarkable place? As promised, Sarah and David remained anxiously in the back of the patrol car with Emily while the 2 officers approached the house. Through the car window, they watched intently as Mr. Henderson answered his front door, his initial expression shifting rapidly from confusion to outright defensiveness as the officers began speaking to him. After what felt like an absolute eternity, the officers finally returned to the car. Officer Thompson's face was grim, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Henderson denies everything," he reported flatly. "Says he's never mistreated any child in his entire career, let alone singled one out based on their race." Sarah felt a crushing wave of despair wash over her. Was this truly how it was going to end? With their daughter's profound pain callously dismissed, her trauma utterly invalidated, simply because a seemingly respected white man denied it? But before she could voice her rising frustration and despair, a sudden commotion outside caught their attention. A woman was hurrying across the street towards them, waving frantically to get the officer's attention. "Wait," she called out urgently. "Please wait. I need to talk to you." As the woman approached the patrol car, Sarah recognized her with a jolt of surprise. It was another mother from the neighborhood, one of the few other black families residing in the area. "I couldn't help overhearing some of what was being said," the woman explained, slightly out of breath from her haste. "And I absolutely need to tell you, this woman," she gestured toward Sarah, "is telling the truth. We've experienced something very similar with our own 2 kids involving Mr. Henderson. We didn't have the courage to speak up officially. We just decided it was easier and safer to start driving the kids to school ourselves instead of letting them ride with that bus driver anymore." Sarah felt a sudden, powerful surge of renewed hope course through her veins. Here, finally, unexpectedly, was the crucial corroboration they so desperately needed. She watched intently as the officer's expressions underwent a noticeable transformation. Officer Thompson's lingering skepticism visibly gave way to genuine concern, while Officer Brooks's eyes narrowed with a look of renewed determination. "Ma'am, we're definitely going to need to take an official statement from you right now," Officer Brooks said decisively to the newly arrived mother. "This information changes things significantly." As the woman nodded her agreement readily, Sarah caught her eye across the short distance separating them. In that brief, silent moment, a profound look of shared understanding passed between them. A connection forged in the shared experience of fear, of the desperate desire to protect their children in a world that didn't always recognize or value their worth. The next few hours passed by in a chaotic, overwhelming blur. More police officers arrived on the scene. Mr. Henderson was eventually taken into custody for further questioning. Remarkably, several other families in the neighborhood, seemingly emboldened by the unfolding events and the courage of the first woman who spoke up, came forward hesitantly with their own previously suppressed stories of discrimination and mistreatment involving the longtime bus driver. As the first light of dawn began to break across the sky, Sarah stood wearily on her front porch, watching numbly as Mr. Henderson was formally led away in handcuffs. The sight brought forth a complex, bittersweet mix of emotions: profound relief, undeniable vindication, but also a deep, lingering sadness at the harsh reality of the world they inhabited. David joined her on the porch, wrapping a supportive arm around her weary shoulders. "It's finally over," he said softly, his voice filled with relief. But Sarah slowly shook her head. "No," she replied, her own voice filled with a quiet, steely determination. "It's just beginning. We have a lot of hard work ahead of us now, David, to make absolutely sure something like this never, ever happens again." Not to Emily, not to any child. As they turned together to go back inside, where Emily was finally sleeping peacefully in her own bed, Sarah knew instinctively that their fight was far from truly over. But they had taken the crucial first step. They had spoken up, stood their ground against intimidation and disbelief, and ultimately made their voices impossible to ignore. And in doing so, they had not only protected their own beloved daughter, but had also courageously opened the door for potential positive change within their fractured community. It wouldn't be easy, she knew, but Sarah felt ready, even eager, for the challenge ahead. For Emily, for the brave woman who corroborated their story, and for every single child who had ever felt scared, marginalized, or unwelcome. They would continue to fight relentlessly for justice, acceptance, and equality. In the tumultuous days and weeks that followed Mr. Henderson's arrest, the Davis family found themselves unexpectedly thrust into the glaring spotlight, situated at the very epicenter of a community suddenly thrown into turmoil. The shocking story spread like wildfire, rapidly dividing opinions among neighbors and stirring up long-buried racial tensions that had simmered beneath the town's placid surface for years. Sarah stood somberly at her living room window one afternoon, watching with weary resignation as a small group of persistent reporters camped out expectantly on their front lawn. The quiet, tree-lined suburban street she had once naively hoped would be a peaceful, nurturing haven for her family had abruptly, jarringly become a contentious battleground of sorts. "Mom," Emily's small voice came softly from behind her. "Are those people going to be there all day long?" Sarah turned, forcing a reassuring smile for her daughter's benefit. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. They'll get bored and go away soon enough." But even as she uttered the comforting words, Sarah wasn't entirely sure if she believed them herself. The ensuing media frenzy had been intense and often invasive, with local news outlets and even some national publications eagerly picking up the sensational story. "Racist bus driver terrorizes young black child," the inflammatory headline screamed, crudely reducing their family's painful, complex experience to overly simplistic, attention-grabbing sound bites. David entered the room then, his face etched with worry lines that seemed deeper than usual. "I just got off the phone with the lawyer," he said quietly, his voice heavy. "The prosecution is officially moving forward with the case against Henderson. They want Emily to testify in court." Sarah's heart clenched painfully at the thought. The idea of her young daughter having to relive her terrifying trauma all over again, this time in front of a daunting courtroom filled with strangers, felt almost unbearable. Yet, she knew deep down it might be absolutely necessary to ensure that true justice was ultimately served. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, David," Sarah said resolutely, pulling Emily close into a protective hug. "For now, let's just focus all our energy on helping Emily heal." But healing, they quickly discovered, proved to be a profoundly complex and challenging process. Not just for their immediate family, but for the entire fractured community as well. As more and more families courageously came forward with their own unsettling stories of past discrimination and mistreatment, not only by Mr. Henderson, but by others within the school system, it became painfully clear that the bus driver's despicable actions were merely symptomatic of a much deeper, more pervasive systemic problem within the town. The local school board hastily called an emergency public meeting, which Sarah and David attended along with dozens of other deeply concerned parents from diverse backgrounds. The atmosphere inside the crowded school gymnasium was incredibly tense, charged with emotion, as accusations and heated counter-accusations flew back and forth across the room. "We absolutely need to implement much better, more thorough screening processes for all school district staff immediately," one angry parent demanded forcefully. "This is clearly just one unfortunate, isolated incident involving one bad apple," another parent argued defensively. "We can't overreact and completely change everything because of the actions of one single person." Sarah listened intently to the contentious back-and-forth debate, her own frustration steadily mounting. Finally, unable to remain silent any longer, she stood up, her clear voice cutting decisively through the surrounding chaos. "This isn't just about one single incident or about one single person," she stated firmly, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This is fundamentally about creating a community, a school system, where all of our children feel genuinely safe, respected, and valued, regardless of their background. We need to look honestly at the bigger picture here, at the underlying biases and insidious prejudices that allowed something like this to happen unchecked in the very first place." Her impassioned words seemed to strike a resonant chord with many in the room, shifting the tone of the discussion. In the days that followed the contentious meeting, a proactive group of motivated parents, representing both Black and white families, came together to form a new diversity and inclusion committee for the school district. They immediately began working collaboratively on concrete proposals for mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff, advocating for more diverse hiring practices throughout the district, and designing a new, confidential system for students and parents to report and address any concerns or incidents of bias or discrimination effectively. Meanwhile, back at home, Sarah and David focused their energy intently on helping Emily navigate the difficult path towards healing. They found a wonderful, experienced therapist who specialized in working specifically with children who had experienced racial trauma and abuse. Slowly, painstakingly, but surely, they began to see encouraging glimpses of their formerly vibrant, confident, and joyful daughter gradually re-emerging from the shadows of her traumatic experience. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah was patiently helping Emily with her homework at the kitchen table, there was an unexpected knock at the front door. She opened it to find Karen, the neighbor who had lashed out at her so viciously in the park weeks earlier, standing awkwardly on her porch. I owe you a sincere apology, Sarah," Karen mumbled, her eyes downcast, unable to meet Sarah's gaze directly. "I was completely wrong to dismiss your valid concerns like that, and I'm truly sorry for how horribly I treated you that day." Sarah was momentarily taken aback by the unexpected and seemingly genuine apology. For a brief second, she was tempted to simply shut the door in Karen's face, to angrily reject the tentatively extended olive branch. But then, she thought immediately of Emily, of the kind of world they were actively trying to build for her future, a world based on understanding, forgiveness, and growth. "Thank you for saying that, Karen," Sarah replied finally, her voice even. "It means a lot." It was undeniably a small step, perhaps, but nonetheless a potentially significant one in the slow, arduous process of community healing. As the weeks gradually turned into months, Sarah witnessed more such small but meaningful steps being taken throughout the community. The school district diligently implemented several new policies, including installing security cameras on all school buses and launching an anonymous online reporting system for students and parents to voice concerns without fear of retribution. Mr. Henderson's trial eventually came and went. With the powerful, corroborating testimony of multiple affected families and the substantial evidence meticulously gathered by the police, he was ultimately convicted on several charges and received a significant sentence. The day the verdict was officially announced, Sarah held Emily close, whispering emotionally in her ear, "You did it, baby. You were so incredibly brave, and you helped make absolutely sure he can't ever hurt anyone else again." Emily looked up at her mother, a small, tentative smile finally playing on her lips. "We did it, Mom," she corrected gently. "All of us, together." As spring finally bloomed, bringing welcome new life and vibrant color back to the neighborhood, Sarah felt a burgeoning sense of cautious optimism take root within her heart. There was still undoubtedly much more work to be done, many significant challenges yet to be faced head-on, but they had made the conscious, difficult choice to stay, to remain rooted in this community, and to actively be part of the positive change they so desperately wanted to see. One bright, sunny afternoon, Sarah watched fondly from her front porch as Emily confidently boarded the yellow school bus. The new driver, a kind-faced woman of color, greeted each boarding child with a warm, genuine smile. Emily turned and waved happily to her mother before taking her seat, immediately beginning to chat animatedly with a diverse group of friends gathered around her. Sarah waved back, her heart feeling unexpectedly full. They had faced profound darkness together as a family, and somehow they had managed to come out onto the other side, stronger and more united than before. They had successfully transformed a deeply painful, traumatic experience into an unforeseen opportunity for profound personal growth and positive community change. And most importantly, they had clearly shown Emily, and indeed everyone else who had witnessed their struggle, the immense power inherent in standing up courageously for what's right, no matter how difficult or daunting the circumstances might be. As the school bus pulled away from the curb, Sarah took a deep, cleansing breath of the fresh spring air. There would surely be more challenges lying ahead on their path. She knew instinctively. The vital work of creating a truly equitable and inclusive community was undeniably an ongoing, never-ending process. But for now, in this precious, hopeful moment, she allowed herself to simply feel hope. Profound hope for Emily's bright future, hope for their resilient family, and enduring hope for a better future where every single child, everywhere, could feel unequivocally safe, deeply valued, and truly, unconditionally at home. Thank you so much for following the Davis family's powerful journey of courage, resilience, and transformation. We hope their story touched your heart and inspired you. If you are moved by this story and appreciate content that highlights important themes like justice, community, and family strength, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories like this to light. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you won't miss our next update. Thank you again for watching.